Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. You guys sent in some seriously thought-provoking stuff on homelessness in America.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff.
We've got excerpts from Homeless or Unhoused, The Impossible American Dream, and a research piece on using hotels to fight homelessness.
Lots to unpack there.
For sure. So the big question we're tackling today, is homelessness simply a matter of housing, or are we missing a bigger picture?
Well, I think it's fascinating how even the words we use frame the whole issue. Homeless versus unhoused.
Right.
Cindy Chang in Homeless or Unhoused dives into this.
Yeah.
It highlights how language shapes our understanding of a problem.
So is there really a difference?
Advocates for unhoused argue that it puts the focus on the lack of access to safe and affordable housing.
Makes sense.
When we say homeless, it kind of implies personal failings.
Ah, so it becomes about choices, not the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Using unhoused shifts the narrative. It suggests the problem isn't the person, but the lack of options.
Yeah, it's like saying jobless instead of unemployed. One's a personal problem, the other is economic reality.
Exactly. And Ching takes us back to the Skid Row era. Researchers like Solenberger Anderson, they described it not just as cheap hotels, but as a whole social ecosystem.
Hold on, Skid Row wasn't always just poverty and despair.
More nuanced than that. Yeah. They documented hardships, of course, but also this web of interactions, jobs, even entertainment. Burlesque shows on Skid Row, a community, albeit a flawed one.
Wow, never thought of it that way. But I guess any place with that many people develops its own systems.
And that's Ching's point. We see this shift from Skid Row as a community-based approach to homelessness imperfect, but still to seeing it as a problem to be eradicated.
And that eradication really took off with post-World War II urban renewal projects.
Right.
Cities tearing down those SRO hotels, Hoke and Sleaton, in the new Homeless and Old, they argue that created the street homelessness we see today.
It seems counterintuitive, but think about it. Those SROs run down as they were provided affordable housing for people who relied on that option.
So when they disappeared, residents had nowhere to go.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it wasn't just buildings. Those communities had support systems in place. People knew each other, helped each other. There were informal networks for work, demolished that you displaced people and entire social structures.
So we didn't fix the root causes, just shifted the problem.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And then in 1984, a HUD report comes along and changes things again. Redefining homelessness, focusing mainly on those without a fixed address living on the streets or in shelters.
But didn't that definition miss people who were technically homeless, even if not on the streets?
Absolutely. This new definition excluded people in substandard housing, those doubling up with family or friends, out of desperation. It relied on a point-in-time count, a snapshot of homelessness on one night. Critics like Hartman and Applebaum argued it vastly underestimated the problem.
Sounds like the definition of homelessness itself became a political battle.
For sure. The HUD report downplayed the link between Reagan-era economics and rising homelessness. Advocates argued the government was minimizing the issue to avoid responsibility.
So clashing narratives with real consequences for how we understand and address homelessness makes you wonder if those experiencing it see it the same way.
Great question, and that leads us to the impossible American dream. Southworth and Brallier found something surprising. Even among those experiencing homelessness, the belief in the American dream, hard work equals success, remains strong.
Wait, even when facing such hardship, people cling to that belief. That's wild.
It is, and it makes you think, how does that belief system impact them? Does it give hope or lead to self-blame?
It's like even when the system fails, you still believe in it. Hard to grasp.
It speaks to the power of ideology and maybe a reluctance to fully blame the system, even when it's clearly not working.
So if the old Skid Row model was flawed and just providing shelter isn't enough, what's next? Our last source, Using Hotels to Fight Homelessness, has some interesting ideas.
Definitely. Pratt and his colleagues explore two main approaches, using hotels as short-term housing while people seek permanent options, and adaptive reuse, converting hotels into affordable housing.
I'm curious about that adaptive reuse. How do you turn a hotel into a real home?
They highlight some cool examples. One project, they gutted an old motel, put in full kitchens, added fire systems, basically transforming them into livable apartments.
So it's not just giving someone a hotel room, it's creating a space to rebuild their lives.
Exactly. And that's just one example. The study details the approaches, challenges, and benefits of using hotels.
That's a great start. But I'm already thinking about the hurdles. I guess we'll have to unpack those in the next part of our deep dive. Thinking about converting those hotels, one detail really stuck with me. They were adding kitchenettes to each room, even for short-term stays. Seems like a small thing, but I bet it makes a huge difference.
You're right. Having even a basic cooktop and sink gives folks the ability to make their own meals.
Yeah.
Not only does that save money, but it gives a sense of control over your own life.
Instead of relying on shelter food or expensive takeout.
Exactly. That feeling of agency can be
Uh-huh.
powerful. It's like, hey, you're not just receiving help. You can take steps to improve your own situation.
It connects back to that American dream idea persisting among those experiencing homelessness. Maybe that little bit of control over meals reinforces that sense of possibility.
Interesting connection. It suggests even amidst hardship, those small acts of self-sufficiency help people maintain dignity and hope.
So we've seen inspiring examples of using hotels. But how scalable is this really? Homelessness is a massive problem. Hundreds of thousands on any given night in America.
That's a valid point. And the researchers acknowledge limitations. The study focused on Orlando, Florida, which has a unique context.
Right.
It's a tourist hub with a big hospitality industry, but also a growing homeless population.
So maybe more opportunities to repurpose hotels in Orlando than, say, a rural area with limited tourism.
Possibly. And even in Orlando, funding is a major hurdle. The emergency funds for hotels during the pandemic are mostly gone. Plus, not every hotel owner is on board.
I can see communities pushing back against having a hotel converted for formerly homeless individuals. NIMBYism plays out with affordable housing all the time.
You're right, that's a challenge and points to a bigger issue. Homelessness is often seen as something to contain rather than a societal problem to address collectively.
Easier to push it out of sight than deal with the systemic issues that contribute to it.
Brings us back to language. When we say unhoused, it shifts the focus to the lack of housing options. Less about personal failings, more about providing housing for all.
So instead of what's wrong with this person, it's what kind of society doesn't provide basic necessities.
Exactly. That's where real solutions lie. Addressing root causes poverty, lack of opportunity, systemic barriers to stability.
Seems like a tall order. Major societal shifts, not just band-aids.
True, it can feel overwhelming. But remember the resilience of the American dream. If people who've lost everything haven't given up hope, neither should we.
Good point. Even if ending homelessness entirely seems impossible, focusing on smaller steps at hotel conversions can make a tangible difference.
Absolutely. The study points out that some adaptive reuse projects could be financially sustainable, a model that works for those experiencing homelessness and their communities.
So not just charity, but creating a system where housing is both socially responsible and economically viable.
Exactly. Requires a shift in thinking. Not managing homelessness, but investing in solutions that address root causes and create pathways to thrive.
A big part of that is shifting away from seeing it as an individual problem and recognizing it as a symptom of larger societal issues.
You nailed it. We need to move beyond blaming individuals and address the systems that perpetuate inequality and these cycles of poverty.
This deep dive has been incredible. I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but it's given me a new way of thinking about homelessness.
Glad to hear it. It's been a pleasure exploring these sources with you. And remember, the fact that we're having this conversation, questioning assumptions and grappling with these questions is a positive step.
Before we wrap up this part, let's move on to the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore those larger societal issues and see what lessons we can learn from the past as we look for solutions in the present. So we've been talking about these big systemic problems that lead to homelessness, poverty, lack of opportunity, all these societal barriers. It feels kind of overwhelming. Like, how do you even begin to untangle all of that?
It's true. These are deeply rooted issues going back generations, but I think it's important to remember that while it's a huge challenge, it's not impossible to make progress.
One thing that keeps coming up is this tension between individual solutions versus addressing the bigger societal stuff. It feels like a chicken or the egg thing. Like, what comes first?
Yeah, you've hit on a key point, and
Yeah.
the sources you sent highlight those different perspectives.
Right.
We see the 1984 HUD report narrowing the definition of homelessness, focusing on individual circumstances,
Right.
which leads to solutions like shelters and programs.
Mm.
They're important, but don't get at the root causes.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Exactly. Then you have researchers like Cheng Hawk and Slayton arguing that we need to zoom out. Look at the bigger picture. Things like the demolition of Skid Row, the lack of affordable housing, the loss of community support.
So it's less about fixing people and more about creating a society where everyone has a chance to succeed.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that interesting finding from the Impossible American Dream, the persistence of that belief in hard work and success, even among those who have lost everything.
It's almost like even when the system fails, you still believe in it. It's inspiring in a way, but also makes you wonder if it keeps us from demanding more from that system.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Maybe if we all question that myth of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and acknowledge the systemic factors,
Yeah.
we'd be more likely to push for those bigger changes.
So if we want a society where homelessness isn't a crisis, where do we even start?
Well, maybe it's helpful to look back even at a flawed example like Skid Row. Sure, it had problems, but it did offer a kind of community-based support connections and resources that helped some people find stability.
So instead of asking how to get rid of Skid Row, maybe we ask what can we learn from it and adapt to today?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think those hotel conversion projects we talked about give us an idea of what that could look like. It's not just giving someone a roof, it's creating a community, offering support services, empowering people to take control.
It's like taking that idea of Skid Row, a place to find support and connections, and updating it for the 21st century.
Right. And maybe, just maybe, by combining those tangible solutions like affordable housing with the less tangible but equally important things like community and support, we can start to make real progress.
This deep dive has been so thought-provoking. I feel like we just scratched the surface, but you've really changed how I think about homelessness.
It's been great exploring these sources with you. And remember, even the fact that we're having this conversation, questioning our assumptions, trying to understand this issue, is a step in the right direction.
Before we go, I want to leave everyone with one last thought to chew on. If Skid Row, with all its problems, was a kind of community-based approach to homelessness, what could a better, more just solution look like today? What kind of society do we want where everyone has a chance to thrive no matter what? Keep those questions in mind as you learn more about this issue.
That's a powerful way to put it. Change starts with asking the right questions.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep sending in those sources, and we'll keep exploring these important topics that matter to you. Until next time.